She had learned over many quiet years that a woman could be surrounded by people and still feel entirely alone. In her family's house, there was always conversation. Plans were discussed at the table, names were mentioned carefully, fortunes weighed, connections evaluated, and yet no one ever asked what she wanted. She was not unkindly treated. That would have been easier to name. Instead, she was managed. Her future was spoken of as if it were already arranged, folded neatly into the expectations of others. Each invitation, each dinner, each polite introduction carried the same unspoken message. This is for your good. This is how things are done. She smiled when required. She listened. She thanked. And each time she felt herself growing smaller. In that world, affection was measured in advantage. Marriage was spoken of as security, not companionship. Love was considered a luxury, best left to novels and foolish dreams. She was not foolish. She had learned that early. What exhausted her was not resistance, but endurance, the endless patience, the constant restraint. The way her silence was mistaken for agreement. On that evening, nothing particularly dramatic occurred. There was no raised voice, no argument, no slammed door. Only another conversation, delivered with pleasant tones and careful concern, about a gentleman whose income would solve several family anxieties at once. She nodded, as she always did, and something inside her quietly reached its limit. Later, when the house had settled into its routines and the familiar walls felt closer than ever, she gathered only what was necessary. No farewell note, no declaration. She did not wish to be followed by guilt or persuasion. She wished only for space. The night air met her like a held breath finally released. The streets were calm, softened by the hour. Lamps glowed without urgency. The world beyond her family's expectations seemed unexpectedly vast. She walked without direction at first, guided more by instinct than intention. Eventually, she found herself in a public square she had passed many times without noticing. By day, it was busy and ornamental. By night, it became something else entirely, quiet, open, unclaimed. She sat on a stone bench, the cool surface grounding her thoughts. Around her, the city rested. There was no one to impress here, no one to negotiate with, no one watching her worth as if it might be measured and exchanged. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe enough to stop thinking. The peace surprised her. It settled slowly, like warmth after cold. The tension she carried so carefully loosened its hold. Her breathing deepened. The world did not ask anything of her, and so she slept, not from collapse, not from despair, but from relief. She did not hear his footsteps at first. He was accustomed to being noticed, accustomed to eyes turning, conversations pausing, judgments forming before he had spoken a word. Even in solitude, his presence often carried weight. That night, however, the square belonged to quiet things. He had not intended to pass through it. His route had been chosen without thought, his mind occupied elsewhere. It was the stillness that caught his attention, and then, unexpectedly, a woman asleep on a public bench was unusual, but not unheard of. What held him was not impropriety, but composure. She did not look distressed. She did not look careless. She looked at peace. Her hands rested loosely in her lap. Her expression was unguarded, in a way rarely permitted to women under constant observation. There was no performance in her rest. He slowed, then stopped. It would have been easier to continue on, to assume she was waiting for someone, or that the moment was none of his concern, but something in her stillness suggested intention, not neglect. He considered how to proceed. Authority would have been simple. A command, a question framed by position. He had learned early how such approaches shaped responses. He chose differently. When he spoke, his voice was low and unhurried. "Miss?" No reaction. He waited, giving her the dignity of time. "Miss?" he repeated gently. Her eyes opened slowly, as if waking from a pleasant dream rather than sudden alarm. For a brief moment, confusion passed across her face. Then awareness returned. She sat upright at once, mortified. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, already gathering herself. "I did not mean to—" He lifted a hand, not to interrupt, but to reassure. "There is no offense," he said. "I only wished to be certain you were well." She hesitated, unused to such a question without implication. People often asked how she was, in order to proceed with what they intended next. This felt different. "Yes," she replied after a moment. "I am." He believed her. There was no insistence, no demand for explanation, only a shared understanding that something rare had been briefly protected. The square seemed to hold its breath around them. She stood, smoothing her coat, already preparing to disappear back into the roles expected of her. He did not stop her. "Then I wish you a safe evening," he said. She met his eyes once more. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or simply respect. They parted without names, without promises, without knowing that the quiet moment they had shared would unsettle lives carefully arranged. The square returned to silence, but neither of them carried it away unchanged. She told herself the night in the square would fade, that it would become one of those strange, private moments the heart stores away without explanation. A softness she could return to in memory when everything else felt sharp. By morning, she realized she had been wrong. The house was already awake when she slipped in through the side door. The familiar smell of bread and soap should have steadied her. Instead, it felt like stepping back into a room where the air had been measured and rationed. Her mother saw her first. No scolding, no anger, only that careful, searching look that meant the next conversation was already forming. "You were out late," her mother said quietly. "I needed air," she replied. Her mother nodded, as if air were an indulgence they could not afford. By breakfast, the subject arrived as it always did. A gentleman, a possibility, a solution. Her father spoke as though he were discussing weather. Her mother spoke as though she were protecting her. Her brother spoke as though he were pleading for patience. And the name they repeated was not the man in the square. It was a man she did not trust, Mr. Carver Sloane. He had come into their lives through her brother's friendships, the kind that promised fortune and delivered only trouble. He always smelled of confidence and quick opportunity. He always arrived with new plans and left with someone else's money. "Carver has secured tickets," her brother said, too brightly. "A box, even. It's an honor, Ilara. You've always wanted to go." She had wanted many things once. She looked down at her plate and felt something inside her tighten. "I don't want to be paraded," she said. Her father's mouth flattened. Her mother's eyes flickered with warning. Her brother rushed in quickly. "It isn't like that. It's only an evening. Only a performance. Only. Everything in her life was framed as temporary when it belonged to her, and permanent when it belonged to the expectations placed upon her. She might have refused. But refusal in that house never ended the conversation. It only stretched it. It only made her the cause of worry, the cause of shame, the cause of hardship. So she agreed. Not because she believed in the evening, because she wanted the arguments to stop. By late afternoon, a dress arrived, not hers, not chosen by her. Emerald silk, fine gloves, a reticule that matched too perfectly. The kind of clothing that tried to change a woman's story before she even opened her mouth. Her mother stared as if the fabric itself were dangerous. Her father said nothing. Her brother smiled with relief. Carver arrived at dusk, all charm and shallow bows, speaking as though he belonged in every room. He praised her appearance with the sort of compliment that felt like ownership. "You'll do," he said softly, as if he had made her. She ignored him. In the carriage, London glittered beyond the windows, like a world that did not care who deserved what. Carver talked without pause, explaining who would be present, who mattered, who might notice. Ilara listened with her body and not her mind, the way one does when enduring. When they reached the opera house, the sound hit her first. Applause, music, laughter tucked behind fans. Her chest tightened. The air smelled of perfume and money and heat. Everyone moved with practiced confidence, as though they had never questioned whether they belonged. Carver guided her toward a private box, with the pride of a man showing off stolen goods. "Stay quiet," he murmured. "Smile when spoken to. Let the evening do its work." Then astonishingly he left. Not entirely at first, just drifting toward the corridor, speaking to a passerby, then another. His attention scattered as it always did, hunting advantage like a dog hunts scent. Ilara remained in the box, alone, waiting for him to return. Minutes passed. The music began. She tried to focus. Truly she did. She had dreamed of the opera once, imagined it as something bright and unreal, but tonight the notes felt distant. Her body remembered the bench in the square, the calm, the quiet permission to stop. Her eyes grew heavy. She told herself to sit upright, to keep watch, to remain present. And then the world slipped. She woke to thunderous applause and the brutal clarity of realizing she was not where she thought she was. Her cheek was warm against something firm, wool, cedar, something darker she could not name. She jerked upright, her breath caught. She had been leaning against a man's shoulder, not Carver. A stranger sat beside her, still as stone, posture controlled in a way that suggested he had not moved the entire time she slept. Heat rushed up her throat. I am so sorry," she whispered, mortification burning through her skin. "I did not mean to—" His head turned slightly, and she met eyes that did not flinch. Blue, cold, assessing. He looked young enough to be dangerous and old enough to be accustomed to being obeyed. "Didn't mean to fall asleep," he said, voice low and precise, "or didn't mean to use a stranger as your pillow." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I didn't mean any of it," she said. "Where is Mr. Sloane?" The corner of his mouth lifted, but it was not kindness. "The gentleman who abandoned you?" he asked. "I haven't the faintest idea." Ilara's stomach dropped. Around them, the audience rose, a rustle of silk and conversation. She felt eyes turn, not fully, not openly, but enough. The subtle attention of those who enjoyed discovering a new story to consume. The man beside her stood with effortless grace. Then he offered his hand. "I'm afraid," he murmured. "You've created rather an interesting situation." Ilara did not take his hand. "I should go," she said, already calculating exits, already searching for Carver in the crowd beyond the box. "Too late," the man replied, almost conversationally. He glanced toward the opposite boxes. "Do you see them?" Against her better judgment, she followed his gaze. Women leaned toward one another behind fluttering fans. An opera glass lifted openly toward their box. Faces wore the bright hunger of polite scandal. "They've been watching for quite some time," he continued, "watching you sleep against my shoulder." Her pulse stumbled. "Why didn't you wake me?" she hissed. His eyes narrowed. "Because," he said, leaning in just enough that only she could hear, "you have solved a problem I have been attempting to navigate for weeks." Before she could ask what that meant, the curtain to their box swept aside. A young woman in pale pink entered first, curls perfect, smile sharpened by purpose. Behind her came an older woman, glittering with jewels. And behind them several others, society arranged into a small hunting party. "Your Grace," the girl in pink said sweetly, "I didn't realize you had brought a guest." "Your Grace." The title hit Ilara like ice water. She had been sleeping on a duke's shoulder. The duke straightened, the room aligning itself around him as if it had always belonged to him. His hand settled at the small of Ilara's back. Proprietary, warm, impossible. "Lady Celestine," he said calmly. "Ladies." Then, without hesitation, he offered them a lie dressed as truth. "May I introduce Miss Ilara Whitcomb?" he continued, voice smooth as polished glass. "A dear friend of my sister." Ilara's mind screamed for correction, but her body remembered the square, remembered being seen without being consumed. And now, with predators watching, she understood something simple and brutal. This was not a moment for innocence. This was a moment for survival. So she lifted her chin and let her upbringing do what it had been trained to do. "It is a pleasure," she said, voice steadier than her heart. The Duke's hand pressed lightly, as if rewarding her for understanding the game. Lady Celestine's eyes narrowed. "Whitcomb," she repeated. "How interesting. I don't believe I know the family. My sister met Miss Whitcomb at a lending library," the Duke replied smoothly. "They've been corresponding ever since." More lies, perfectly placed. The older women asked questions the way knives ask questions. Ilara answered carefully, neither apologizing nor overreaching, balancing on the thin wire between humility and dignity. And then the Duke delivered the blow that made the world tilt. "Miss Whitcomb will be staying at my house for the remainder of the season," he said, as if announcing weather, "as my sister's guest." Ilara turned toward him, shock breaking through her composure. When the women finally withdrew, satisfied they had enough to whisper about, she faced him fully. "You cannot do that," she said under her breath. "You cannot announce my life as if it belongs to you." His gaze held hers, unblinking. "I already have," he replied, "and now we must decide what you will do next." "My name," she said sharply. "I don't even know your name." He paused, as if considering whether honesty suited him. "Adrian Wycliffe," he said at last. "Duke of Hawthorne." The name carried weight, the kind of weight that crushed lesser lives without effort. Ilara's mouth went dry. "And Mr. Sloane," she asked. "What is this? What arrangement was made?" Understanding flickered in his eyes. "He didn't tell you," he said softly. "Of course he didn't." Ilara felt the trap close, not around her wrists, but around her reputation. Adrian stepped closer, voice lowering. "I will explain," he said. "But first, tell me this, Miss Whitcomb. When you leave this opera house tonight, where exactly will you go? And why does it feel as if you have already been running for far longer than anyone knows?" She accidentally fell asleep on... She did not answer him at once. The question lingered between them, heavier than it should have been, because it was not truly about destinations. It was about belonging, about whether there was a place that would receive her without expectation or price. "I will return home," Ilara said finally. The word tasted unfamiliar. Home had become a negotiation. Adrian studied her, not as a duke might assess a consequence, but as a man weighing truth. The opera house emptied around them, the noise receding into echoes and fragments. Somewhere beyond the velvet and marble, carriages waited, drivers shouted. The city resumed its movement. "You may," he said, "but if you do, tonight will not remain a misunderstanding." Her spine stiffened. "I have done nothing improper." "No," he agreed calmly, "but impropriety is rarely defined by facts." They stood close enough now that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, half hidden by shadow. He did not touch her again. The earlier gesture had been deliberate, strategic. This moment was different. "They will speak," he continued. "They already are. A woman does not sleep against a duke's shoulder without consequence, regardless of how it came to be." She closed her eyes briefly. absorbing the familiar ache of blame arriving before wrongdoing. "And your solution," she said, opening them again, "is to remove me from my life entirely." "My solution," he replied, "is to give you time." He gestured toward the corridor, where his coat waited, where his name opened doors with ease she could not imagine. "My sister's presence will make the arrangement respectable, temporary. You would be protected from speculation, and I would be spared a different kind of attention." "What kind?" she asked. Adrian hesitated. "The kind that assumes I am available," he said, "and therefore owed." She understood more than she wished to. Men like him were not pursued for affection. They were pursued for proximity to power. Women arrived with smiles sharpened by ambition, families in tow, futures mapped before the first courtesy. "And when your sister tires of me?" Ilara asked quietly. "She will not," he said. "She values discretion." Ilara almost smiled at that. Almost. "And my family," she pressed. "What will they say when I do not return tonight?" His gaze did not waver. "That depends," he said, "on whether you wish them to believe you are still available for their arrangements." The word landed cleanly. Available. She thought of the square, of the bench, of the way sleep had come easily when nothing had been asked of her. The decision should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like relief pressing at the edges. "I will not be paraded," she said, "not by your family, not by mine." "Nor by me," Adrian said immediately. Silence followed, deliberate and respectful. At last, she nodded. "Very well," she said, "but there will be conditions." His brow lifted slightly. "Of course," he replied. "I would expect nothing less." They left the opera house together, not arm in arm, but side by side, an alignment rather than a display. Outside, the air was cool and alive with departure. His carriage waited, black and understated, bearing a crest she had seen before in passing and never considered hers to approach. Inside, the space was quiet, the ride smooth. "My sister's name is Margaret," Adrian said as they turned onto the street. "She is sensible, observant, and entirely uninterested in scandal." "I find that reassuring," Ilara replied. "You will stay in the East Wing," he continued. "Your privacy will be respected. My staff is accustomed to discretion." She watched the city slide past the window, lamps blurred into soft gold. For once, movement did not feel like flight. "And my family?" she asked. "They will come looking." "They will be informed," Adrian said evenly, "that you are under my sister's protection. That, at least, would silence immediate questions." The carriage slowed, then stopped. Hawthorne House rose before them, broad and calm, as though it had been waiting without impatience. Inside, nothing glittered unnecessarily. Everything spoke of permanence rather than display. Margaret Wycliffe met them in the entry hall. She was not what Ilara had expected, not severe, not indulgent. Her eyes were sharp with intelligence, her smile measured. "So," Margaret said, taking Ilara in with a glance that felt neither curious nor judgmental, "you are the cause of my brother's evening." Ilara inclined her head. "I regret the disturbance." Margaret laughed softly. "Good. That means you're honest." She turned to Adrian. "You might have warned me." "And miss the pleasure," he replied. Margaret dismissed him with a look, then took Ilara's arm. "Come," she said. "You look as though you could use tea and quiet." The room Ilara was shown to was simple and warm, overlooking a small garden where night flowers opened without audience. Tea arrived. Silence followed. Margaret sat opposite her, studying her with open interest. "My brother does not invent stories lightly," she said at last. "If he has done so, it is because the alternative was worse." "That seems to be his nature," Ilara replied. Margaret smiled. "You are perceptive." They spoke little more that night. Exhaustion arrived without warning, heavier than the sleep in the square, but no less gentle. Ilara lay awake only long enough to recognize something unfamiliar. Safety. Morning brought light through pale curtains, and the sound of the house waking itself without urgency. Breakfast was served quietly. No questions pressed upon her. Later, a letter arrived. Her mother's hand, concerned, controlled. Already negotiating explanations. Ilara folded it without reading further. By afternoon, Margaret suggested a walk in the gardens. "You will be noticed eventually," she said. "Better to let it happen on our terms." As they stepped into the open air, Ilara saw Adrian standing near the far hedge, engaged in conversation with a gentleman whose posture suggested expectation. The man noticed her at once. Recognition flashed, interest sharpened. Margaret sighed softly. "That," she murmured, "is Lord Harrington. He believes himself very persistent." Adrian glanced toward Ilara, something unreadable in his expression. The gentleman followed his gaze. "And who," he asked, already smiling, "might that be?" Adrian did not answer at once. Ilara felt the familiar tightening begin, the sense of being assessed, weighed, positioned. Then Adrian spoke, clearly enough to be heard. "Someone who is not available." The words carried. Lord Harrington's smile faltered. Ilara inhaled slowly. For the first time, she did not feel removed from her own life, not shielded, not hidden, chosen. And somewhere beneath that unfamiliar steadiness, a quieter realization settled. This arrangement was no longer merely about protection, it was becoming something else, something that would require far more courage than sleep ever had. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost unreal. Hawthorne House did not rush, it did not press, it observed. Ilara learned quickly that this was intentional. Margaret guided her gently through the customs of the household, explaining what was expected and, more importantly, what was not. There were no demands for gratitude, no subtle reminders of obligation. Servants greeted her with polite neutrality, as though her presence had been decided long before she arrived. It unsettled her at first. She was accustomed to being watched closely, measured by usefulness. Here, she was simply allowed. Mornings were quiet. She read in the small sitting room overlooking the garden, where light filtered through leaves and softened every thought. Afternoons brought walks, sometimes alone, sometimes with Margaret, whose conversation moved easily between wit and reflection. Adrian was present, but never intrusive. He appeared at breakfast on some days, absent on others. When they spoke, it was with the same measured respect he had shown her from the beginning. He did not ask questions that required confession. He did not probe her past. Instead, he listened. It was disarming. News, however, did not remain outside the gates for long. By the third day, callers began to arrive, women with practiced smiles, men with curiosity sharpened by interest. Families who had not visited Hawthorne House in months suddenly remembered obligations of friendship. Margaret received them all with ease. Ilara observed from a distance at first, learning the subtle language of glances and pauses. She noticed how often eyes returned to her, how speculation moved like a quiet current beneath polite conversation. She was no longer invisible, nor was she exposed in the way she had feared. When introductions were made, Margaret spoke her name clearly, without embellishment. Adrian stood nearby, present enough to discourage over-familiarity, distant enough to avoid spectacle. And still, questions found their way to Ilara. "Have you known His Grace long? How fortunate you must feel?" "You are very lucky, and indeed," she answered carefully, offering nothing that could be turned into rumor. Luck had nothing to do with it. Late one afternoon, a carriage bearing her family's crest arrived. Ilara saw it from the window and felt the familiar tightening return, sharp and immediate. The house seemed to pause around her, as if aware that something delicate approached. Margaret found her moments later. "They've come sooner than I expected," she said quietly. "You are not obliged to see them." Ilara considered the offer. Part of her wanted to retreat, to let the arrangement speak for itself. But avoidance had never loosened her family's grip. It had only encouraged them to press harder. "I will see them," she said. "Briefly." Margaret nodded. "I'll remain nearby." The drawing room felt smaller with her parents inside it. Her mother rose at once, relief and calculation warring on her face. Her father followed more slowly, his expression guarded. "Ilara," her mother said, "you should have sent word." "I am well," Ilara replied calmly. "You need not worry." Worry, she knew, was not what had brought them. Her mother's gaze flicked toward the windows, the furnishings, the evidence of protection that surrounded her. "This situation," her father began, "is unusual." "Yes," Ilara said, "it is." Her mother sat, smoothing her gloves. "We were concerned by the gossip. A woman's reputation is her family's responsibility," Ilara finished gently. "Or her own." Silence fell. Her father cleared his throat. "We only wish what is best for you." "For whom?" Ilara asked. The question landed heavier than any accusation. Her mother recovered first. "You must understand," she said, voice softening, "the opportunities that arise when one is noticed by a man of influence." Ilara felt something inside her settle. "No," she replied. "I understand the cost." Before either could respond, the door opened. Adrian entered without ceremony, his presence shifting the room's balance immediately. He did not look at Ilara at first. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitcomb," he said. "You are welcome." His tone was polite. "Final." Her father rose, stiffly. "Your Grace. We are grateful for your hospitality." "It is offered freely," Adrian replied, "and temporarily." Her mother's eyes sharpened. "Of course," Adrian continued. "Miss Whitcomb is here at my sister's invitation. Her comfort and autonomy are our sole concern." Autonomy. The word echoed. Ilara watched her parents adjust, recalculating. "We had hoped," her mother began, "that she might return home soon." Adrian turned then, his gaze steady. "That decision," he said, "will be hers. Nothing more, nothing less." When her parents left, their politeness intact but strained, Ilara remained seated long after the door closed. She had expected triumph, or fear, or guilt. Instead, she felt something quieter. Space. That evening, she found Adrian in the library, standing before a shelf of well-worn volumes. "You didn't have to intervene," she said. He turned. "I chose to," he replied. "There is a difference." She studied him for a moment, seeing not the Duke, but the man who had woken her gently in a square. "You are altering the course of things," she said, "for me." "So are you," he answered. The truth of it lingered between them. Later, alone again, Ilara wrote a letter she did not send. It contained no accusations, no pleas. Only a simple boundary, written clearly at last. She folded it and placed it in the drawer. Some things did not require explanation to exist. As night fell over Hawthorne House, Ilara realized something had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer running, and whatever lay ahead would not be decided for her without her consent. Not this time. The invitation arrived on cream paper, edged with gold so thin it appeared almost modest. Almost. Ilara recognized the seal at once. Lady Bracknell was not known for modesty of any kind. Her gatherings were carefully curated stages, where alliances were tested and reputations weighed with surgical precision. Margaret read the card twice before handing it over. "She's decided to acknowledge you," she said. "That usually means she intends to examine you." Ilara traced the edge of the paper with her thumb. "And if I refuse?" Margaret's smile was knowing. Then she will examine you anyway, just from a greater distance and with less mercy. That evening, Hawthorne House prepared without urgency but with intent. There was no rush, no insistence on spectacle. Ilara chose her own dress, a pale blue, unadorned, elegant without declaring ambition. When she entered the carriage beside Adrian, she noticed something new. He looked alert, not tense, not guarded, aware. The townhouse was already full when they arrived. Music drifted from the upper rooms, laughter weaving through it like thread through fabric. As they stepped inside, conversation shifted almost imperceptibly. Eyes turned, whispers adjusted. Adrian offered his arm, not possessively, but with clarity. Ilara accepted, feeling the quiet steadiness of his presence without mistaking it for protection. They were announced, not loudly, not theatrically, but clearly enough. Lady Bracknell approached within moments, her expression one of cultivated curiosity. "Your Grace," she said warmly, "and you must be Miss Whitcomb." Ilara inclined her head. "My lady, how fortunate you are," Lady Bracknell continued. "To find yourself so unexpectedly placed." Ilara met her gaze without flinching. "I find the placement less surprising than the freedom." A pause. Lady Bracknell laughed softly. "Oh, I shall enjoy you." They were separated almost immediately. Ilara drawn into small circles of inquiry, Adrian into conversations of influence and obligation. She answered questions carefully, revealing little and concealing nothing essential. Still, the pressure mounted. At one point, she felt it sharpen when a man twice her age leaned in too closely, when a woman spoke of futures as if Ilara were a topic already agreed upon. She excused herself and stepped onto the terrace. Night air cooled her skin. The city beyond shimmered with life indifferent to gatherings like this one. She was not alone for long. "I wondered how long it would take," Adrian said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "I was nearly polite for too long," she replied. He smiled faintly. "You were exact." They stood in silence, the sounds of the party muffled behind them. "You are being assessed," he said. "So are you," she replied. "They're watching to see if you will grow bored." His gaze remained fixed ahead. "They underestimate me." She glanced at him then, catching the edge of something unresolved. "And you?" he asked. "What do they underestimate about you?" She considered the question. "That I will leave," she said simply. Inside, Lady Bracknell was already reconfiguring the evening. The moment Ilara returned, she found herself seated beside Adrian at dinner, the placement unmistakable. Conversations circled them like trained dancers. Marriage was mentioned, so was loyalty, so was timing. Ilara felt the familiar tightening again, the sense of being weighed before she could withdraw. Adrian spoke. "Miss Whitcomb will not be making any decisions this season," he said evenly. Vaux paused, eyes lifted. Lady Bracknell arched a brow. "How very modern." "How very necessary," Adrian replied. Ilara turned toward him, startled. "That was not agreed," she said quietly. "I know," he answered, "but it is true." The drive back to Hawthorne House was silent at first. Then Ilara spoke. "You placed yourself against expectation tonight," she said. "For me." Adrian exhaled slowly. "I am tired of watching people mistake access for entitlement," he replied, "and I will not allow you to be treated as leverage." She studied him in the dim light. "And what of you?" she asked. "What do you lose by this?" He did not answer at once. "Certainty," he said finally, "and perhaps convenience." They arrived at the house. At the door, she paused. "This arrangement," she said, "is changing." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." Inside, the house welcomed them with its quiet certainty. That night, Ilara lay awake longer than usual. Not from fear, from awareness. The arrangement that had begun as shelter was becoming a line drawn deliberately, and for the first time she understood the cost of being chosen by another and by herself. Whatever followed would no longer be accidental. It would be claimed. The shift did not announce itself. There was no argument, no declaration, no moment that could be easily pointed to and named. Instead, it appeared in small, unmistakable ways. Adrian began to be present more often, not constantly, not possessively, but deliberately. He joined Ilara for breakfast when his schedule allowed, sitting across from her with a book left unopened beside his plate. He walked with her in the gardens without agenda, matching his pace to hers without comment. When visitors arrived, he positioned himself nearby, not as a guard, but as a quiet boundary that discouraged intrusion. Ilara noticed everything. She noticed how servants adjusted their tone when addressing her. Subtle shifts that spoke of recognition rather than instruction. She noticed how invitations arrived, addressed to her directly, no longer routed through Margaret. She noticed how her name began to circulate without being followed by speculation. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it made her cautious. Change had always come with a cost. One afternoon, while Margaret attended to correspondence, Ilara found herself alone in the small music room. She had never been particularly skilled, but the instrument was familiar enough to offer comfort. She played slowly, unevenly, allowing the sound to exist without apology. The door opened quietly behind her. She did not turn. "You play as if you're thinking," Adrian said. She smiled faintly. "That's the danger." He leaned against the wall, listening rather than interrupting. When she stopped, the silence felt companionable rather than expectant. "You could leave," she said without looking at him. He understood immediately. "You mean I could step back?" he replied. "Yes." He considered this. "You want to know if I will?" "I want to know if I can," she corrected. Adrian crossed the room slowly, stopping several paces away. He did not sit, he did not reach for her. "You can," he said, "at any time." "And if I do," she asked, "then I will respect it." She turned then, meeting his gaze. "No questions?" Questions would imply ownership. Her breath caught, surprised by the simplicity of the answer. Later that day, a letter arrived that shattered the calm. Not from her parents, from Carver Sloane. The handwriting was confident, careless. He wrote as if time had been merely inconvenient, not decisive. He congratulated her on her new situation. He expressed admiration for her fortunate alignment. And then, without subtlety, he reminded her of promises he claimed had been implied. Ilara folded the letter slowly, hands steady despite the familiar surge of anger and shame. That evening, she found Adrian in the study. "I received a letter," she said. He did not ask from whom. "I assumed as much," he replied. She placed the letter on the desk between them. "He believes I owe him," she said, "because my family allowed him to believe it." Adrian's expression hardened, but his voice remained calm. "You owe him nothing. He won't accept that." "Then he will learn." She watched him carefully. "You speak as if this is your responsibility." "I speak as someone who recognizes a pattern," he replied, "and refuses to allow it to continue." Ilara felt the familiar tension rise again. Not fear, resistance. "I will not be rescued," she said quietly. "Not even by you." His gaze softened. "I know," he said. "That is why I am standing beside you, not in front of you." The following days tested that promise. Carver appeared at gatherings where Ilara was present, smiling too easily, speaking as though familiarity were permission. Each time, Adrian did not intervene immediately. He waited, he watched, and each time, Ilara handled it herself. She corrected assumptions. She ended conversations. She refused invitations. When Carver finally confronted her directly, his tone sharp with wounded entitlement, Adrian remained at a distance, visible but silent. "I introduced you," Carver said bitterly. "I positioned you." Ilara met his gaze steadily. "You attempted to trade me," she replied. "I declined. The exchange did not escalate. It did not need to." Carver left soon after, his usefulness exhausted. That night, Ilara stood alone at her window, watching the city lights flicker into existence. Adrian joined her without announcement. "You did well," he said. "I did what I needed to," she replied. They stood in shared silence. "You are no longer running," he added. "No," she agreed. "But I am not finished choosing." He turned toward her, the weight of that admission settling between them. "Nor am I," he said. The understanding that passed between them was neither romantic nor restrained. It was intentional. And with that realization came something both exhilarating and dangerous. The shelter had ended. What remained would require honesty and courage from them both. The first true argument came without warning, not in raised voices, not in accusation. It arrived quietly, the way important things often did between them. They were alone in the smaller sitting room, late afternoon light stretching across the floor in long, pale lines. Ilara had been reading, Adrian reviewing correspondence he clearly wished would end itself. "You are being invited to dinner at Harrington House," Adrian said, setting the letter aside. "Individually." Ilara did not look up at once. "That was inevitable," she replied. "Yes," he agreed. "And unwise." She closed the book slowly. "Unwise for whom?" "For you," he said without hesitation. The certainty in his tone struck her like a hand closing around a memory. "I did not ask you to decide that," she said. "I know," he replied. "I am telling you because the intention is not subtle." Ilara stood, setting the book aside. "And if I go?" Adrian met her gaze. "Then Harrington will assume permission has been granted." "By you." "By proximity," he corrected. Her chest tightened. "This is exactly what I wished to escape," she said. "Being positioned, being warned, being redirected for my own good." He did not deny it. "That is not my intention." "It is the effect." Silence stretched, fragile and loaded. At last, Adrian spoke more carefully. "I am accustomed to navigating these waters. I see danger where others see opportunity." "And I am accustomed," she replied, "to being told danger exists so that others may continue navigating on my behalf." The words landed between them, sharp but honest. Adrian exhaled slowly. "You believe I am becoming like them?" "I believe," Ilara said, voice steady, "that protection can turn into control without announcing itself." The truth of it was undeniable. They did not resolve it then. That evening, Ilara accepted the invitation. She did not inform Adrian beforehand. The dinner was exactly what she expected. Refined, measured, strategic. Lord Harrington spoke of shared interests and future possibilities as if they were neutral observations. Ilara responded politely, revealing nothing. She left early, declining further engagement. When she returned to Hawthorne House, Adrian was waiting, not pacing, not angry, just still. "You went," he said. "Yes," she replied. "I would have advised against it." "I know." Another silence, deeper now. "And?" he asked. "And nothing happened," she said. "Which was the point?" He studied her for a long moment. "I did not intend to make you feel confined," he said. "I did not intend to feel it," she replied. Something shifted then, not broken, realigned. "I cannot promise," Adrian said quietly, "that I will stop seeing danger." "And I cannot promise," Ilara answered, "that I will stop choosing for myself." The honesty between them was stark, unsoftened by romance. It was necessary. The days that followed were marked by restraint. They were still courteous, still aligned in public. But something unspoken now moved carefully between them, neither avoided nor named. Ilara found herself returning often to the square, not to sleep, to remember. One afternoon, as she sat on the familiar bench, the world moving around her without recognition, Adrian appeared at the edge of her vision. "You didn't tell me you came here," he said. She smiled faintly. "You didn't ask." He sat beside her, leaving space. "This is where it began," he said. "This is where I stopped," she replied. They sat in silence, the city humming gently around them. "I don't wish to be your cage," Adrian said at last. "And I don't wish to mistake attention for safety," she replied. He nodded. "I will step back," he said, "if that is what you need." She considered him carefully. "Don't," she said. "Just don't step ahead." Something eased then, subtle but real. They rose together, not touching, not retreating. That evening, a letter arrived from Ilara's mother. Short, measured, concerned about appearances. Ilara read it once and set it aside. She no longer needed to respond immediately. For the first time, the space between choice and consequence felt navigable. And in that space, something stronger than agreement began to take shape. Trust, not granted, earned. The seasons shifted almost imperceptibly. Mornings grew cooler, afternoons lingered. The city adjusted its pace as if preparing for something quieter and more deliberate. With it came a change in how Ilara moved through her days. She was no longer simply present at Hawthorne House. She was participating. Margaret invited her opinions on correspondence, asked her to accompany her on visits that had nothing to do with display and everything to do with influence, handled discreetly. Ilara observed how decisions were made without performance, how respect was earned not through spectacle but consistency. It was a different education. Adrian watched from a careful distance. He did not offer commentary unless asked. When he did, it was measured, factual, devoid of persuasion. Ilara noticed how often he chose silence now, as if testing the boundaries they had negotiated without formally naming them. The effect was unexpected. She missed him, not his presence, his attention. One afternoon, she found him in the map room, a place she had avoided out of habit rather than reason. Papers were spread across the table, routes marked in precise ink. He looked up as she entered, surprise flickering before composure returned. "You're planning to travel?" she said. "Yes," he replied, briefly. "When?" "Soon." She felt the answer before the date was given. "And you didn't think to mention it." "I wasn't certain it mattered," he said carefully. The restraint in his voice made something in her tighten. "It does," she replied. "Not because I require explanation, because absence clarifies things." He considered that. "You are right," he said. "I was attempting to give you space." "And I was beginning to understand it," she said. "But distance and disappearance are not the same." They stood across from one another, the map between them a poor substitute for what they were not saying. "I will be gone for 10 days, Adrian said at last. "No longer." Ilara nodded. "Then go," she said. "We will see what remains." His departure was quiet, no carriage drawn to attention, no farewell scene. The house adjusted, as it always did. In his absence, invitations arrived with renewed frequency. Some sincere, some opportunistic. Ilara accepted selectively, guided by instinct rather than obligation. At one such gathering, Lady Bracknell approached her with unusual candor. "You are being watched," she said lightly, as though discussing weather. "Not because of who you stand beside, but because of who you no longer require." Ilara smiled. "That seems exhausting." "It is," Lady Bracknell replied. "For those accustomed to leverage." The remark lingered. So did Carver's name, resurfacing in whispers, attached to schemes that had begun to unravel without Ilara's presence, lending them credibility. She felt no triumph at this, only clarity. On the 6th day of Adrian's absence, she received a letter in a hand she did not recognize. The words were brief. He would return early. No explanation. She folded the note and waited. When he arrived, it was near dusk. Ilara happened to be in the garden, the air heavy with the scent of late flowers. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. "You came back," she said, not turning. "Yes." She faced him then. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." The honesty in it disarmed her more than grand declarations ever could. They walked slowly, neither leading. "I discovered something while I was away," Adrian said. She waited. "I am very good at deciding what should not happen," he continued, less skilled at allowing what might. She met his gaze. And I do not wish to miss my own life while guarding the perimeter of yours." The words settled between them, fragile and sincere. That evening, a formal request arrived from Ilara's family. Not a demand, an appeal. They wished to host a small dinner, to reassure acquaintances, to demonstrate unity. Ilara read the letter twice, then placed it on the table between herself and Adrian. "They are trying again," she said. He nodded. I will go," she continued, "alone." Adrian did not protest. "I will be nearby," he said instead. "If you wish." "I don't," she replied, "but thank you for offering." The dinner was civil, polite, controlled. Her mother spoke with careful warmth. Her father watched closely, as though waiting for a sign he could interpret as leverage regained. Ilara offered none. When she left, she felt neither victorious nor wounded, just finished. She returned to Hawthorne House late too, the city quieting around her. Adrian waited in the library, a book unopened in his hands. "You chose well," he said. "I chose myself," she replied. Silence followed, comfortable and unforced. Later, standing once more at the window, Ilara reflected on how far she had come, not in distance, but in decision. The season was turning, and with it, the understanding that what they were building could not remain undefined much longer. Soon choice would require declaration, and neither of them could pretend not to see it coming. The letter arrived sealed in black, not mourning black. Authority black. Ilara recognized the crest at once. It belonged to the Dowager Duchess of Hawthorne. Margaret read it first, her expression tightening just enough to be noticed. "She is requesting your presence," she said carefully. "Not inviting." Ilara took the letter, reading the brief, formal lines. "A visit. At a specified hour, private, no explanation." This was inevitable, Ilara said. "Yes," Margaret agreed, "and unpleasant." Adrian was informed that evening. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. "She does not summon lightly," he said. "I will go," Ilara replied. Adrian's gaze sharpened. "You are not required to face her alone." "That is precisely why I must," Ilara answered. The carriage ride the next morning felt longer than distance allowed. The city gave way to quieter streets, then to the wide calm surrounding the Dowager's residence. The house itself stood immaculate, severe in its restraint. Ilara was shown into a drawing room that felt more like a tribunal. The Dowager Duchess entered without haste. She was not tall, but she commanded space effortlessly. Her eyes were sharp with intelligence and expectation, her posture a lifetime of authority distilled into stillness. "Miss Whitcomb," she said, "thank you for coming." "Your Grace," Ilara replied, inclining her head. They sat. "I will be direct," the Dowager said. "You have caused a great deal of interest." "I did not intend to," Ilara replied calmly. Intent is irrelevant, the woman said. Effect is everything. Ilara met her gaze without apology. I have observed you, the dowager continued. Your restraint, your composure, your refusal to exploit attention. A pause. These qualities are rare. Ilara did not respond. They are also dangerous, the dowager added. To those who mistake power for entitlement, understanding settled slowly. You wish me to remove myself, Ilara said. The dowager smiled faintly. I wish to understand whether you intend to remain. Ilara considered her words carefully. I do not intend to be used, she said, nor to be hidden, nor to be exchanged. The dowager studied her for a long moment. And my grandson, she asked, what do you intend with him? Ilara's breath steadied. I intend nothing that he does not choose freely, she replied, and I expect the same. Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, the dowager laughed, softly, briefly. You are not what I expected, she said. That is rarely a disadvantage. She leaned back. Adrian has spent his life managing expectation, she continued. It has made him effective. It has also made him cautious. I am familiar with caution, Ilara said. Yes, the dowager replied. That is precisely why you concern me. The meeting ended without verdict, no approval, no dismissal. Ilara returned to Hawthorne House unsettled but unbowed. Adrian waited for her in the long gallery, pacing once before stopping himself. You went, he said. I did, she replied. And she did not ask me to leave, Ilara said, nor to stay. He nodded slowly. That is worse than certainty. That is choice, Ilara replied. That evening, Hawthorne House hosted a small gathering. Nothing grand, nothing strategic. Friends, family, quiet conversation. At one point, Ilara found herself alone with Adrian near the windows overlooking the garden. She asked me what I intended, Ilara said. And, he asked. I told her the truth. He studied her face, searching for signs of strain. I'm no longer afraid of her, she added. His expression softened. I'm no longer afraid of myself, he replied. The admission hovered between them, unguarded. Across the room, Margaret watched them with a knowing smile. The season had nearly reached its end. What remained could no longer be negotiated through silence or arrangement. Soon, something would have to be named. And both of them understood that the next choice would not belong to family, society, or expectation. It would belong only to them. The announcement came quietly. No formal cards, no orchestration of rumor. Only a simple gathering at Hawthorne House, arranged by Margaret with deliberate restraint. Those invited understood immediately that this was not an evening meant to entertain, but to conclude something long observed. Ilara stood at the window before the guests arrived, watching the garden settle into dusk. The air was cool, steady. She felt no urgency to move. Adrian joined her without ceremony. This is the moment they've all been waiting for, he said. Yes, she replied, but not the one they expect. He studied her carefully, as though seeing her for the first time without context. You are certain, he said. I am, she answered. Not because it is easy. Because it is mine. The room filled slowly. Conversation remained measured, respectful. Margaret moved among the guests with ease, her presence setting the tone. At last, Adrian stepped forward. The room quieted. I will not take much of your evening, he said calmly. Only enough to clarify what has already been assumed. He did not look at Ilara at first. For some time now, Miss Ilara Whitcomb has been the subject of interest, he continued. Not because she sought it, but because others projected their intentions upon her. A pause. That will no longer continue. Eyes shifted. Ilara felt no fear, only steadiness. She is here, Adrian said, turning toward her now, because she chose to be, and she remains here because she chooses still. He did not reach for her hand. He waited. Ilara stepped forward. I am not promised, she said clearly, nor am I protected by arrangement. I'm here by consent, my own. The simplicity of it carried weight. I will not be negotiated, she continued. I will not be positioned, and I will not be spoken for. Silence held the room. Then Adrian spoke again. I have asked Ilara to consider a future with me, he said. Not as a solution, not as an answer to expectation, but as a shared choice. He looked at her fully now. And I have made it clear that I will accept her answer, whatever it may be. The room seemed to breathe again. Ilara did not hesitate. I will consider nothing that costs me myself, she said, but I will walk beside someone who understands that love is not possession. She turned to Adrian. And I will choose you, she added, because you waited for me to choose at all. The decision did not arrive as applause. It arrived as recognition. Later, when the guests had gone and the house returned to its quiet, Ilara found herself alone once more in the garden. The same place where seasons had shifted, where understanding had grown without force. Adrian joined her, close enough now that distance was no longer required. You are certain, he said again. Yes, she replied, because this is not an escape. He smiled, the kind of smile that came from relief rather than triumph. No, he agreed. It is an arrival. They stood together, not bound by announcement, but by alignment. For Ilara, the greatest change was not the future unfolding before her. It was the stillness within. She had learned that being seen did not require performance. That love, when it was worthy, did not hurry, that the courage to choose oneself often arrived quietly, disguised as peace. And that sometimes the most powerful decision a woman could make was not who she accepted, but who she refused to become for the comfort of others. There is a kind of waiting that diminishes us, and another that prepares us. This story lives in the space between the two. In the courage it takes to pause, to step away from expectation, and to listen for the voice that has always been present beneath the noise. To be chosen is meaningful. But to choose yourself, your pace, your worth, changes everything. If this story kept you company, if it brought you calm or recognition, you are welcome to stay a little longer. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Some stories are not meant to rush you forward. They are meant to sit beside you until you are ready.